Today, let's talk about China and the United States of America, the two biggest economies in the world, and also among the two biggest enemies. Washington and Beijing are currently busy fighting on the economic front, thanks to US President Donald Trump's tariffs. Over the last few days, this tariff war has become like a boxing match. Each side is punching the other and punching pretty hard. Neither side is backing down, and the fight is only escalating and intensifying. Donald Trump began the onslaught with his Liberation Day tariffs, which were unveiled on the 2nd of April. More than 180 countries, including China, were on his list as Trump unveiled his reciprocal tariff rates. Within a few days, he had a change of heart. He paused the tariffs for almost all countries in the list for 90 days, with just one exception, China. Since then, this match between Trump and the rest of the world became Trump versus China, with other countries being given a temporary breather. Donald Trump says China has hampered American interests and hence it deserves high tariffs. China says it is ready to take on Washington in this game. It has even matched Trump's tariff rates piece by piece. So what does this escalating trade war mean for India and the world at large? Hello and welcome, I'm Shubham Chauhan. Let's get started. China said today it would raise tariffs on US goods to 125% from 84%. This new levy will come into effect starting Saturday, which is the 12th of April. Beijing's announcement comes after Trump raised the tariffs for China to 145% this week. A spokesperson from Chinese Finance Ministry indicated this was their last reaction to Trump's tariffs, and that what the US president was doing had no practical significance in economics. The spokesperson said, "At the current tariff level, there is no possibility of market acceptance for US goods exported to China. The United States' imposition of round upon round of abnormally high tariffs on China has become a numbers game with no practical significance in economics. If the US continues to play the tariff numbers game, China will ignore it." Beijing also said that Washington must take responsibility for this turbulence that Trump has caused around the world. Now, in a separate comment by the Foreign Ministry of China, it said that trade wars don't have winners, adding that if US wants to sort this mess out with dialogue, it must stop being reckless. The Foreign Ministry warned that China would respond to no end if US continues with its tariffs on China. Now, as we are recording this video, Washington hasn't responded to the latest set of tariffs imposed by China. But trust Donald Trump or his team to say or do something about this. Now, just to give some context as to how did China and the US end up here in the last couple of weeks. Now, before 2nd April, when Trump announced reciprocal tariffs, China was charging a 67% tariff on US goods. US in return used to impose a 10% tariff on goods from China. Now, Trump did not like this huge disparity like we've seen in the case of US and several countries. Trump has been vociferously against this disparity. He said America was at a disadvantage all this while because of this huge gap between what US was charging and what the other country was charging. On 2nd of April, Trump slapped a 34% reciprocal tariff on China. A few hours later, US announced an additional non-reciprocal 10% tariff, bringing the total to 54%. A couple of days later, China hit back. It said it will match Donald Trump's tariffs. So it decided to levy 34% tariff on US goods in addition to the existing 67%. So China's tariff stood at 101%. Trump then threatened China to withdraw this additional 34% tariff. But of course, Beijing didn't pay heed. So Trump went ahead and imposed an additional 50% tariff on Chinese goods. So the score was China at 101% and the US at 104%. Like I said, a typical boxing match. Each side wants to have an upper hand. Now, all of this has escalated just within a few days, which is the last week or so. Now, the logic that Donald Trump is giving for charging higher tariffs generally is that the trade deficit America has with some countries must come down in the interest of the American economy. Now, trade deficit is the difference between a country's imports and exports. In China's case, the total trade between US and China stood at around $585 billion as of 2024. Now, top US exports to China include soybean, aircraft, pharmaceuticals, and petroleum. Now, in return, US brought smartphones, laptops, batteries, and toys from China. Now, the thing was that US imported far more than China imported from America. This meant that US had a deficit of about $295 billion. If you look at it in terms of numbers, this trade deficit was $295 billion in 2024 alone. And that is equal to around 1% of the American economy. Now, over the years, this deficit has only widened to America's disadvantage, as Trump calls it. In fact, this is not the first time that Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping have gone hammer and tongs at each other. In 2018, that is the first Donald Trump administration, a similar thing had happened. Trump imposed a 25% tariff on steel and 10% tariff on aluminium imports. At the time, he accused Beijing of unfair trade practices. Eventually, the two sides reached a trade agreement, but it was never fully implemented. And by 2020, that's when the COVID pandemic hit, ties between US and China hit rock bottom. But Donald Trump's overall approach on China ensured that American imports from China were down from a 21% share of America's total imports in 2016 to just 13% last year, that is 2024. So what do the latest round of these escalating tariff war between US and China mean? Experts say a trade war is, of course, in the offing. Extremely high tariffs mean that trade would take a hit. America would find it extremely difficult to get access to Chinese goods and materials, simply because it wouldn't be affordable beyond a point. Besides, such high tariffs would mean that these costs would eventually trickle down to the consumer, especially in America's case because it has been importing a lot from China. Investment bank JP Morgan said on Wednesday, it is more likely than not that the US economy will shrink later this year. There are predictions of a recession as far as the United States is concerned. China, on its part, is trying to galvanize support against the US on this front. Today, Chinese President Xi Jinping met Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez in Beijing. Xi called on the European Union to join hands to resist what he called the unilateral bullying by the United States. The Spanish Prime Minister, whose country buys about $50 billion of goods from China every year, said that trade tensions should not hamper European Union's cooperation with Beijing. So where does all this leave India then? As for America, New Delhi has gotten a 90-day breather from Trump. Like I said, he has paused his reciprocal tariffs on all countries except for China. India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has asked exporters to not panic with regards to Trump tariffs. He assured them that India is working on the right mix and right balance in its proposed trade agreement with the United States. This 90-day pause gives some more time to India and the US to finalize and chalk out the trade deal, the first phase of which is expected to be completed by November 2025. Now, these trade deals are being looked at as a way to escape the high tariffs imposed by Donald Trump. US officials say that post the announcement of Trump's tariffs, more than 50 countries, including India, have rushed to chart out a trade deal with Washington. On the China bit, India would be hoping for as less damage as possible. Now, India is dependent on China for almost 70% of pharmaceutical ingredients it uses. So any disruption on that front could lead to an increase in production costs and eventually delay in the delivery of drugs. This would then have a chain reaction in the generic drugs market. Same is the case with manufacturing. India's manufacturing is reliant on China for a lot of components that eventually make up your electronics like batteries, semiconductors, display panels. All of this is coming from China into India. So if there's a large-scale disruption there, that means smartphones, laptops and appliances, electronic appliances could get costlier in the coming weeks. As for US and China, it remains to be seen who blinks first in this boxing match and what impact this one-upmanship between the two big powers in the world has around the globe. That's all we have for this report. Thanks for watching.